You picture a cave, dark, smoky, a fire crackling near the entrance, your ancestors huddled inside, staring out at the night. That image is everywhere. Textbooks, movies, cartoons. But for most of human history, it's wrong. For roughly 300,000 years, the vast majority of your ancestors never lived in a cave at all. So where does this idea even come from, and why has it survived for so long? Let's start with the evidence itself. Caves preserve things. Bones, tools, ash, pollen, all of it locks into the sediment and stays there for tens of thousands of years, protected from rain, wind, and sunlight. Open-air campsites don't get that protection. A hut made of branches and hide breaks down in a few seasons. A hearth on open ground gets washed away by the first flood. This creates what archaeologists call a preservation bias. You don't find more cave sites because more people lived in caves. You find more cave sites because caves are where the evidence survived. Think about it this way. If you wanted to understand how people live today, and the only buildings still standing in 10,000 years were bank vaults and bunkers, would you conclude that? Of course not. But that's roughly the logical trap the cave myth sets. So what does the real picture look like? Anthropologist Louis Binford spent decades studying the camps of modern hunter-gatherer groups, from the Nunavut in Alaska to groups across Africa and Australia. His research, built on direct observation rather than guesswork, showed something consistent. Mobile foraging groups build light, temporary shelters, windbreaks made of branches, simple domed huts covered in grass or hide, structures that can go up in an hour and be abandoned the next morning. Why build something temporary? Because permanence wasn't the goal. Following the animals mattered more. Following the ripening plants mattered more. A fixed home base only makes sense once you stop moving with the seasons, and for most of the Pleistocene, moving with the seasons was survival itself. That doesn't mean caves were irrelevant. They mattered enormously, just not as year-round homes. At Pinnacle Point, on the southern coast of South Africa, archaeologist Curtis Marian and his team uncovered evidence that early Homo sapiens used a coastal cave system roughly 160,000 years ago. They weren't living there permanently. They were exploiting a very specific resource, shellfish. The cave sat close to a coastline rich in food, and the site shows repeated, seasonal use tied to that food source. A shelter of convenience, chosen for what surrounded it, not chosen as a permanent address. Chauvet Cave in France tells a different story entirely. Its walls hold some of the oldest known figurative paintings in the world. Horses, lions, rhinos, rendered with a skill that still stuns researchers today. But the cave shows almost no evidence of ordinary daily living. No thick layers of butchered bone. No long-term hearths. Chauvet looks less like a home and more like a destination. A place people traveled to for something ceremonial, not somewhere they cooked dinner every night. So caves show up in the archaeological record as toolkits for very specific jobs. Shelter from a storm, protection from predators during a cold snap, a canvas for art with deep symbolic meaning, rarely the base of daily life. Now picture an actual day, reconstructed from what the evidence tells us. You wake up in a shelter built from bent saplings and animal hide, open on one side to let the smoke from last night's fire drift out. The camp sits near water, close to a stand of trees still holding fruit. Within a few hours, some of the group leaves to track game. Others stay near camp, working stone tools, tending children, processing plant food gathered the day before. By evening, the group might move a short distance, following where the food is, or they might stay another few days if the spot is still productive. Nobody is thinking about permanence. They're thinking about tomorrow's resources. Here's the counterintuitive twist. Actual, deliberate architecture, houses meant to last, foundations dug into the earth, walls built to remain standing for generations, arrives surprisingly late, and it arrives hand in hand with agriculture. Once people started planting crops instead of following them, staying in one place stopped being a liability and became an advantage. You couldn't walk away from a field of ripening grain the way you could walk away from a hunting ground. Fixed homes are, in a real sense, a side effect of farming, not a hallmark of primitive life. The cave-dwelling caveman is often less ancient than the first farmer's mud brick house. There's also a deeper reason the caveman image stuck around that has little to do with archaeology and everything to do with psychology. A cave is dramatic. It's dark, mysterious, easy to draw, easy to animate, easy to put in a museum diorama. A temporary hut of woven branches is harder to render and less visually striking, so it quietly disappeared from the popular imagination, while the cave took over as shorthand for ancient. So why does any of this matter to you now? Sitting in a house with 4 solid walls and a roof that isn't going anywhere. Because it reframes what home has actually meant across human history. For most of the time your species has existed, home wasn't a fixed structure. It was a temporary answer to the question, where does today's food come from? Rebuilt again and again, season after season, generation after generation. Permanent shelter is the exception in the human story, not the rule. It's a relatively recent invention, tied less to safety and more to the moment humans decided to stop following the land and start controlling it. You don't picture a cave anymore. Now you picture something closer to the truth. A shelter built in an afternoon, torn down a season later, and rebuilt somewhere new. Because for nearly all of human history, moving was the plan, not the emergency.